just have this. So of course, we have gone live now. So thank you, Herman. I have to do it again. So thank you very much, Herman, for being part of it. But we also haven't spoken about the Netherlands, the mediation circle. We have to do that later sometime. Whenever you have time, we have to discuss that.
Yeah, it's still open in the air now. I realize that, but I really want to like to talk about you further maybe next week.
Yeah, we should do that. So thank you, Herman. Now, only thing is that obviously you've been on other shows and they are available on the YouTube channel. So people can search for Herman, Mediator Vikram on YouTube. But Herman, you'll have to tell us a little bit about yourself and then we'll go into language and mediation. Yours is the first session. The only issue that comes up with the first session is that people might think this is the direction to take. And a lot of messages I've got that what do you expect? I said, look, you interpret it the way you want. There's no, I mean, you can take it anywhere. So, so please, Herman, yourself, before after you tell us about yourself, maybe I'll take a minute just to talk about the things which are coming up. So please, Herman, about yourself.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm honored to be here. Language is a very important thing for me from childhood on. I'm raised in a family where religion was a very important thing. So the Bible, the stories, and also literature. So my father was reading books a lot. I have one brother, two of us just on the couch, and then listening to all the stories from the Lord of the Rings later on, and etc., etc. So we are almost drowned in words, you know, so that's also a part of my story, I think. I studied philosophy because of language. Later on theology because of the Greek and Hebrew. I love the languages a lot because in every language there is a whole world. There are feelings, there are power plays, there is plot, there is a lot of action, I think, in language. So I'm since 2015 a mediator full-time, and I'm doing a lot in teams at the moment, and also a project from the government here in Holland. So I'm a busy man.
Yes.
And a happy man.
But good, not that busy, not to come to our shows. So yes, thank you very much. But what I'll take, give me 1 minute, not much. All I have to say is that go to mediatorvikram.com and please, whatever information about the work. This was a book that I contributed to. I took this opportunity to talk about the work that I'm doing, because otherwise no one reads what I put out. So I said,
yeah, it's very important. Yeah.
Because what had happened was that over the last 2 years on the YouTube channel, there are almost 500 videos. Now, for people to even check what's happening and what are the various shows, so I put that out there, connecting on social media. Obviously, those posts, again, algorithm shows it only to some people. But the World Mediation Circle is the focus now. So I haven't really planned too many events coming up. I want to focus on this, and each country, let's start with that and then work all the, and of course support. Thank you, Herman, for supporting the thing.
Yes, very important. Yeah.
And then of course, various I mean, of course, you have to look at posts, what's happening, but I do put something out here, what's happened previously in the last 2 years and with Ken, all that. So all that is here. And what's coming up, Herman, is that on the 24th, basically Russia invaded Ukraine on 24th February. So just on that day, we'll have a discussion on mediators and the war in Ukraine. So personal and professional experiences of mediators in relation to the war, so that we just have it's an open discussion. You can come in and whatever thoughts you have, you can put it out there. So that's coming up. Next month, I don't want to put too many events, but at least on Women's Day, last year we had about, I think, 25 women from some, I think 14 or 17 countries. Let's get women to talk about their thing. So that's what's coming up. So Herman, all yours, language and mediation, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, what you showed me and all of us a few seconds ago, one of the things that is really striking me then again is the language you use. Edutainment. Of course, it's not a word you created, but it's a wonderful word that what languages can do. You know, I mean, edutainment is so much a beautiful combination, and it's the fun that is in it. and it's also serious. So that's one of the beautiful things of language, I think, that you can combine things, that you all the time can make new ways of looking at things. And even the way you present yourself, mediator, advocate, golfer, peacemaker, it's wonderful, of course. The joke of the golfer, but it's not a joke at all, because it's really the truth, I understand. But it means something. And it says something about you, the way you present it. And even World Mediation Circles, I think that's a story. It's three words, but it makes a story. It's part of a whole idea. Even mediation itself, or peacemaking, is not a word. It's part of a bigger plot, of a script, of a kind of way you look at things and make sense of things. And I think that's the most beautiful thing of language. I think we cannot underestimate the importance of language in the way we are as human beings on Earth. Without language, I think we are a total different species, another animal. And the chaos we see in the world, or the experiences we all have, we make sense of it in stories. So in a way, I think you can say, when you use story as a verb, you can say we story ourselves into the world. It's the way we are existing. And so also in mediation, and especially when the whole story is saturated with conflict and escalation and power play and being victimized or whatever people are experiencing, I think the language is very important to use as a vehicle to make peace. So that's why I really was happy when you talked about this theme before of this symposium. It's wonderful to be here and talk about that.
Thank you. Now you have to take it in whatever direction you want to take it.
Yes.
I'm a spectator. You get me in if you want to get me in. But I can be a mute spectator. I'm not going to put myself on mute, but I'm a mute spectator. So please.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think it's important to say that because of that language is so important thing for me. I was also very interested in one of the methods of mediation, narrative mediation. And I think it's interesting to talk about that this morning. I've done a lot of training here in Holland on that method. It's not a very well-known method of mediation. Most of the time we are talking about facilitative mediator or maybe transformative mediation. It's also more known as a method, but the narrative mediation method is a very important one, I think. And I want to talk about it a little bit this morning about that. I have a beautiful quote of N. Pelosi. It's already from 1977, and it says, "Life hangs on a narrative thread. This thread is a braid of stories that informs us about who we are and where we come from and where we might go." And I like the metaphor. Metaphor is, of course, also a very important part of language. Making images, making fantasies, making in words kind of visual picture of what you're aiming at, or what you're talking about, or what you're experiencing. Life hangs on a narrative thread. It's a little bit a desperate metaphor, because you're hanging on a thread. It's a kind of danger there, and it's almost collapsing there. It's a little thread, but it's hanging on it. And so it's a kind of lifeline. The narrative, the language we use, and the language that makes a narrative is a very important one. And I think we tell ourselves stories in order to live. So all the time when we meet, all the time when we also as mediators meet persons at our table or in our room, they are talking and talking, and we can listen to the stories that are told. Well, in a narrative mediation, one of the most useful books about it is this one. It's When Stories Clash. And it's written by Gerald Monk and John Winslade. And the basic presupposition of the narrative mediation is that it's not the case that persons are clashing, or that their interests are just in contrast with each other and are clashing, but that their stories is a story of clashing, and that their stories are clashing also together. So the beautiful thing about that approach is that when you are looking not deep into the personality of the persons that are in your room, not in the psychology of their character, is it a narcissist or is it a borderliner or is it whatever, you are just looking a different way. You are hearing what they are saying. And later on, I will say a little bit more about, especially you are hearing, looking for what they are not saying, what is just in between the lines. So it's a clash of stories, not of personalities, not of interest. It's not a deep thing into their hearts or into their character, into their history. So mediation gets almost a sort of therapy then. It's not an individual thing either. It's not one person is the fighter and the other one is the victim or the other way around. It's an interactive thing. Conflict in a narrative mediation is viewed as something in between people. Stories that are even scripts, that are having plots, that are making them go as they go, that are telling their behavior to do things, even things that they really do not want to do. So it's very interesting to look at conflict from this lingual perspective. About you're looking for plots, for scripts, for themes, for characters, for protagonists, and then the story dictates our behavior. Dictates, of course, not really, but it's giving a kind of flow, and it makes use of the persons that are there. So it's very interesting to look at it that way, and it's making your it's also making it very free, because when you look at it that way, you are not it's not necessary to go deep into the history of the persons just to know the truth, but you are going there because they can tell, and you are listening to what they are not telling. So that's the second thing I want to say, and maybe I can show another book also, because it has such a wonderful subtitle. I have 6 books here.
Wow.
Wait a minute.
That's a lot of books, Herman. You're intimidating me because I don't read them.
Yeah, I have a problem with books. I like them too much. This one, that's therapy. You see, it's mediation. Is the narrative mediation has its roots in therapy, and the subtitle is The Archaeology of Hope, and also a wonderful metaphor. And the basic thought of it is that people in need, whether they are in narrative in therapy because they have a conflict in themselves, or in mediation when people are in conflict with each other, there lacks a lot of hope. Most of the time they are coming to you because they are not able to fix it themselves anymore, and there is a lot of frustration, and of course, so that's clear. And when you are looking narrative at things, you are digging into their past, into their stories, to hear about the little parts that are there that are talking a different story, that are talking about the story of hope, that have peace and harmony and connection and well-being, etc. in it. And that's a beautiful way of viewing at it, that you are as a mediator, and together also with the participants of the mediation, you together are digging into the dust to find hope, to find little pieces of hope that is not very not at the moment already a story, but that are elements that you can use to make a new plot, a new script, new themes, story of peace. Digging into the untold stories. And very interesting then is when you are very specific listening to what the persons are saying, you are double listening. That's what in the narrative mediation is a very important term. You hear the story and you hear the story under it, the untold story. And this double listening is really a beautiful technique, because people are saying all the time what they are not saying. it's in between the lines, the unspoken words that are almost spoken, that you are very interested in as a narrative mediator. And you are, in your work as narrative mediator, really making a kind of notebook full of these little gems that you spot, that you hear. And that's very important also because in narrative mediation, you begin in the caucus. Always you hear first the story of one person, so complete as possible. Double listening for these little gems, these little parts of hope that are not in the big story. The big story is a story of clash, of conflict, but the unspoken words, the slips of the tongue that tell of another world, that tell another story. And that's very interesting because people are giving you the pieces of the new story unconsciously. They are not really aware of doing that. But you help them to hear them themselves. So you give them back in a way that is very different from the other methods of mediation. You have a very active role as narrative mediator, using the language they are almost not using, but they just a little bit used for you. You give voice and language to the unspoken harmony and peace they are longing for, they are missing, they have experienced in the past maybe, but especially they want to receive, to reach in the mediation. So that's very interesting that you look for the words and for the metaphors and for the little things that are just in contrast with the dominant conflict story. And I like this very, very much because the language of persons is very important. You know, when someone says, for example, well, I'm very angry, and you are not really saying the good word. And you say, oh yeah, I see, you are very. It hurts. No, I'm angry. Oh yes, you are angry. It's not hurting, it's angry. So you must all the time try to be very near to the exact words of the person. And when a person says things they almost do not really are conscious of, it's a very tricky thing, of course, when you say, well, I heard, but when you talk yourself, that's a very interesting thing of narrative mediation, I think, that as a narrative mediator, you are making the new language sound in the room. So you take it out of their own mouth, you have heard it saying themselves in between the lines, but still. And then you are a little bit, it's a courageous thing to do, in fact, because you are creating with them a new story and giving words into the room that are not their words in their consciousness, but they did talked about it. It's a little bit difficult to tell. It's early in the morning here. I try to get my English better out of my mouth. So we all know the experience that when people are talking together, they are when they are angry, they try to be very formal. So this sir or this madam, it's all not the names. And we all know that it's very interesting to say what they do not say. So make a different atmosphere in the room, because we name the person. So you're talking, Sandra says instead of she or whatever. So in the language, you change the atmosphere a little bit. We are used to that already. But in the narrative mediation, you make it really your big job. And that's very interesting for this method, I think. So that's the archaeology of hope. So maybe I can talk a little bit about the process of mediation that you use. You're using. It's in 3 phases. The first process part is engagement. That's the caucus part. And you are just looking at the person, hearing him or her, and trying to make sense of the whole film. All the aspects, the plot, the script, the themes, the persons that are in there, the protagonists. So you have a view of where this person is in the sense of where the language is. And the same thing you do with the other one. What also is very important, that you work at a real connection with the person so that he trusts you. That's in every method, of course, very important, not only in the narrative mediation, but in the engagement process part, the first part of the process of narrative mediation is especially very important to have a trustful relationship with each of the participants, because they need to tell you also their vulnerable part of the story. So you hear this, you can do this double listening better. So that's the first part. And then in the second part, you are, it's called deconstructing the conflict story. You are deconstructing it. And in the third part, you are constructing the new story. The middle part of the process, the deconstruction part, is a very important part, because you are helping them to making the problem not personal, but objective. Externalizing is a very important technique in narrative mediation. And you're helping people to see the problem is the problem, not the other person. And it makes a kind of distance between the problem and where they are themselves. It's even making a kind of connection between them as kind of togetherness in being the enemy against the conflict, that the conflict becomes the enemy of them together, that holds them. The story that gives them no space anymore, that gives them no freedom anymore to act the way they want to act. Very often people come to us and say, well, I'm not the person anymore that I want to be. It's having a grip on me. I'm not free anymore. So we can also then go as a therapist, say, well, what does it say about your youth and how does it come? Did you come there? But in the narrative mediation, you only look at the story. You say, okay, tell the story. How did it come to happen this way? And you are making it a kind of thing they are looking at from a distance. It's their story, it's their reality. But you help them to make a kind of step outside of it together and say, well, what we see there, that's a very bad thing. Where are we now? And this externalizing, you do with the language. The problem is the problem, not the person. You are all the way, all the time, I mean, when people are making the mistake of saying, yeah, you did that, and that's the reason why we are here. You are rephrasing it all the time in the impersonal way. You're not correcting them. You're not saying, well, what you say, we did not, we do a narrative mediation here, so this language is not correct. No, you are just, as an example, are going for them, doing it for them. And when you use a different language, when you talk a different way, it's contagious. People are taking it over unconsciously. It's a wonderful method of helping people without embarrassing them, without giving them the idea that they are doing things wrong, kind of enticing him, kind of, how do you say that? You seduce, almost seducing them to go a different direction, because the way you talk about it is what they really like. So the way I talk about it at that moment must already be near their heart. That's why the engagement part is so important. I have heard a lot of words they said, but they did not consciously say. So I have a kind of vocabulary, their vocabulary of the unspoken story that I use to seduce them into the new reality. But the middle part is deconstruction. And deconstruction means that there must be less grip of the conflict story. There must be created a kind of togetherness. The conflict story must be a common enemy. And it's also having very often a name. We help people also in the language, name it, give it a name. Sometimes it even is a personal name. Yeah, we call it Paul. Well, it's very rare, but sometimes it's just the problem or it, or the fight. The fight is there again. So the elephant in the room is named. and it's externalized in that way. And together they hate it more and more and more. In the deconstruction process part, there is coming up a kind of even hatred, you can say, disgust about this problem together from different perspectives, of course. But they come together in a way in the language about the problem. So you're also loosening the problem in the grip of it on them. The grip isn't that strong anymore, and a different language is arising. They are together talk a lot about what happened and giving words to that whole issue that is making them in a kind of way more aware of where they do not want to be. So that's the deconstruction. And one other thing to say about this deconstruction is also, and that's a technique of mapping the effects. There's even a whole book of it. Third one.
Good. I need this.
Michael White, mapping the effects. And he is all the time making kind of really, well, let's say it's simple. It's about digging into the hateful and the hurtful things that are the effects of the conflict. And very often we are very short when we ask someone, well, what did it do to you, or what are the effects? They say one or two sentences and it's okay. In a narrative mediation, you're making it very, very, very broad, very, very concrete. You're asking for another example and another example. So they are in the language saturated with this sense of, wow, this is so deeply not what we want. It is so terrible, impactful. We are, and also then building the hate, building the disgust, building the willingness, being prepared to get loose of it, to let go. And mapping the effects is a language thing you do. It's giving a lot of words, also giving a lot of stories. We as narrative mediators help people also to really make the stories richly told, you know, with all the colors and all the hurt and all the pain that is there. And that helps the persons really to get grip of their own willingness to be in the construction part of the process and having the new story. So that's a very interesting thing, what you can do with language. Even so, when you are talking about a problem, it's helping them not to be part of the problem, but to get loose of it. So that's interesting. Well, and then you have the third part of the process, construction of the new story. And I told already, you dig into the archaeology of hope. You're making a new story out of the little things that are already said. And then you are really talking about a future that is not really there, but they want to be there. In a narrative mediation, it's very important that we use also letters. We are writing each other. As a mediator, I write a lot to the people. And it's a kind of, it's a little bit like little novels, little stories. For example, in a parenting plan. In the parenting plan, very often we just have the rules. What do we do when the divorced husband has a new partner? And how do we communicate about it? How do we do it with the children? So we're making rules, just the ethics of it. But in the narrative mediation, we're making stories. Just imagine, you come at the place of your ex-partner, and there is a new partner there, and you did not know before. What happens? What is the worst scenario that could be happen? What is the story of peace? What is the story of? They are just writing stories to each other, and that's such a wonderful thing, because when we think of our best version of ourselves in a new story, and the reality comes later on, there is a script already in our brain, in our behavior, that helps us to do the thing we want to do, and not to go back into the conflict story we are willing to go out of. So in the construction phase of the narrative mediation, we use language, we use metaphor, we use stories, we use plots, we imagine ourselves in situations where we are the best version of ourselves. And that's a wonderful thing. It's such a powerful thing, this whole language part. And the questions we are asking then, we call that restoring questions. Restoring questions. So we are helping them to not only have good commitments or making appointments, but making it in language very concrete and embellished and with all colors that are there. So that's what I experience in narrative mediation as a wonderful thing, the power of language. And I think there is no greater power than story. Also in the negative sense of the word. You were talking a few minutes ago about the war in Ukraine and all the wars in the world. I think that the fuel of conflict in the world are conflict stories. And these stories have a life of their own. And very often we think it's just the facts that are making things happen. But I think it's the stories that make things happen. And when we change the story, when we change the language, when we change the way we talk about people, talk about each other, and talk about the things we want to do with each other, it changes the world. So I am a very hopeful person in that sense. It's not the characters that need to change. It's not the deep things that are must be healed before. It's the stories themselves that help us to get out of our hurt, get out of our conflict. And that's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, no, interesting. I think important things that you brought out were the fact that listening to things which are not said and listening to maybe the words of the heart or the language of the heart, something of those kind of things. So I think those are, I'm telling you, there is, of course, the discussion we've already had so many times about the fact that there is a mediation which maybe is not into all that, and the mediation that you and I would want to promote is this kind of mediation. So I think that itself is maybe the fact connecting language and mediation to the fact that what are you really, I think mediation itself, how do we look at mediation itself? I think that also we have to be able to discuss, because the blind man and the elephant situation. So some people would say in that mediation, that maybe those settlement conferences, this is not what we're talking about. So I think by itself, we should also look at mediation as to what we are looking at as mediation. So that's important. And this is how I've put it out, even the mediation circles, when I put that out as to what I am looking at, the heart, soul, spirituality, which again, so many times I keep speaking about, and the fact of the human connection, the humanistic approach. I think this is where all this fits in. So it's really important, I think, what you're saying.
Yeah, I must think of a beautiful image I saw a few days ago on LinkedIn. Two adult persons after a fight with the backs to each other, looking different ways. And inside of them was made a kind of picture of the little child spirit they were looking to each other, trying to connect again. So the adult ones, the outside was looking in different ways and angry still because of the conflict, and inside this child, the two children that were looking into each other. And it's a beautiful image, I think, that the spirit is willing, is longing for peace. And also we are, the slips of the tongue are telling our real need, I think. Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah, I think that's what you have to get to. I think that's why the story part that you're saying is something which really is, I mean, how much of it you can actually bring out, how much you can actually listen to without listening to the words, the no words coming out. I mean, lots of things happening there. Yep. So I think that's something which definitely narrative part, because I think it's, I mean, of course, people call it a model, narrative mediation. I think it has to be part of your mediation itself. You don't have to look at it as a separate thing. Okay, now I'm doing narrative mediation. It is something which you bring into mediation in general. In general, I think the categorization boxes that some people feel that need to be made, don't need to be made. It's all merged. It's all going to flow into each other. So yeah,
Yeah, I like also the eclectic method of just getting any technique from whatever the source is, use them. And indeed, it's interesting to when you are really doing it in the school of narrative mediation, you have these three phases. But in general, in every mediation, in a way, it's going in that direction. And I think the focus on language is a thing that you can use in every method of mediation. It's wonderful to have this open ear and open eye for what is happening in the wording, in the scripts. Especially the part of the scripts is very important, because also there is in language always a power play. And when, for example, someone is positioning him or herself as a victim, almost immediately the other one is then the perpetrator. So, but that's a story. It's not something that is in the persons, but the story makes it that way. And I imagine sometimes that I am just here, the police is coming around and I'm accused of a terrible crime, and I'm going into court. At that moment, I'm in a story and I behave like a very bad person, I think. I think I just do everything wrong that proves me wrong. Because the story is so strong, you're into it and you behave it like it then. So I think people are helped a lot when they see that the story is making more of it than the bad character of the other one, for example.
Yeah. What I would do is that basically there is a question which Mandi has put. Mandi is, of course, in second thoughts, which I, of course, keep telling people, beautiful island, but this is what the image that you were talking about.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Wonderful.
that's good to look at that. So let's see what the question is. The question here is, everybody is a story and has a story in mind for his life. What is the relationship in these stories? Anything, Herman?
The relationship in these stories between all the people?
Everybody is a story and has a story in mind for his life. What is the relationship in these stories? Maybe we can ask Mandi to clarify. Mandi, if you're listening, please, if you want to elaborate.
Yeah, I would like to.
Maybe if she wants to come in. Mandi, if you're listening, please, if you want to come into the Zoom, please come into the Zoom. Let me see, because Mandi is very enthusiastic about the whole concept of mediation and what the work that I am doing also. But that's true if she comes in. Yeah, but otherwise, Herman, any specific examples or anything that you want to talk about, your good experiences? Mandi, you want to come into the Zoom?
Maybe you can see the text of the question.
No, she'll come in. She'll come in. I think she'll come
Okay.
in. But any specific, I mean, experiences of yours in relation to the story part of it, something interesting came up and something like that, you want to share something there?
Yes, well, what for me was really a surprise, because many that are hearing about this message say, well, this is for the elite. It's for the persons that are very verbally gifted, and the normal people, whatever that may be, are not really able to do it. But my experience is that especially the ones that have a lot of difficulty with the high culture language of the law and the lawyers and the courts, are very, very open to the story part, but not writing it then, but telling it. So very often I help them to just make a kind of podcast to each other. So they are speaking the stories, they are telling it, they are just out loud are fantasizing about how it would be. and they make a kind of Insta post of it, and are very creative in that sense. So even when you are talking about language, it's not always literally writing. It's always, of course, the talking. But I see a big impact on persons that are even not really able to read a parenting plan in a good way, or having something. It's not of use for them because they are just not looking into it. They are not paper persons. But when they are making stories about it, and we are making also a library then of all kind of audio parts, it's wonderful. Yeah.
Oh, interesting. I think lots in terms of techniques or style. I think interesting things can come up because maybe I think a lot of parts of the world, I think still there is a limited box of how mediation is looked at. I think that by itself has to expand. So that definitely has to happen. But
yeah, and what people what mediators, a lot of mediators think it's very difficult in this method, but that you have such an active role. So you are really putting in your own vision of the new story that they are not really telling, but still telling. So you are a co-creator, co-author of the new story. That's also in the narrative mediation a normal concept, that the three of you, when there are two persons and you as mediator, the three of you are making the new story. You have a very active role. And I think it's good. We had the symposium on neutrality. And of course, that was also a theme there. You are, as a human being, part of the process, and be honest and open about it. That's beautiful, I think.
Yeah, I think that again is something which, like I said, the word neutral is used so casually sometimes in relation to mediators and mediation, not looking at the fact this is a person sitting there. This is not a machine. Because finally, then we'll have to start looking at the way artificial intelligence is going. Are you just programming machines to sit there and taking away the human part of it? Because human and neutral, I think, maybe.
Not a good combination. The neutral humans are not the most kind ones. No.
Exactly. I think that's the important thing that needs to come out. And that's why that symposium was, I mean,
Yeah.
the idea was that let's not use these words so casually. And I mean, it's easy to say that because maybe when you were that training, which of course the word I don't like, but when you're training, it's easy to just say it and not get into a discussion because, like I say, these 40-hour factories to make mediators, neutrality itself will be 40 hours just just to talk about.
Yeah, and the opposite is engagement, and engagement is in this method also very important. I like it a lot. Yeah, that's very beautiful about it. And also our own story, because I'm still a little bit trying to get grip of the question that was asked. I think I'm not really understanding it, but what I understand now is that it's asking for how all the relationship between these different stories, the story of the three of us in the mediation, or we are part of a whole society, of course, which is made of stories and all kinds of layers around it. I think it's very important to be conscious and open about what your story is. And also as a mediator in this way of doing things with narrative mediation, your own story is also part of it. You're open about that. What makes your heart tick? What is your vision of the future? How do you want to be a mediator in that setting? How do you want to be a person with the other persons that are hurting? Yeah. So opening up and making a new language, I think that's also a metaphor of society. What in small happens in the mediation is, in a sense, a kind of experience you can have also in the broader sense of democracy.
I'm just checking with Mandi. Mandi, that question that you had put in the chat, can you elaborate on that question? If you can come into the Zoom, because she's trying to come in, but she said can't enter. Mandi always has some issue which comes up. Mandi, try again to get into the Zoom. But that question that you put in the chat, please elaborate on it. Okay. Herman wants to know more about that question, but try again on the Zoom. Yeah. Let me see. Because I don't know, sometimes should not be a problem, but she's saying that can't enter the Zoom for some reason. Should not be an issue, I think. I don't know why.
Yeah.
But yeah.
That's
But in
interesting.
terms of, yeah, but in terms of, look, I mean, of course, do you think, if you look at Netherlands and other parts, I mean, is there some, in terms of acceptance of the story part of it, is there some difference there that you see?
Difference between Holland and other
How,
parts of the world?
how people take to the whole narrative part? Are they open? Are they willing to open to
Yeah,
the
there
story?
is, well, the word narrative at the moment here in Holland, at least, and I think worldwide, especially also about the topic of COVID, the book you talked about earlier on. The word narrative is, I think, a word that is used a lot. And most of the time, pejorative in a negative sense. Because it's then a kind of way to frame things, to make things that are bad look good or whatever. And there is a much interest in how narrative and language works, and how it runs countries, and how it runs wars, and how it works also in companies. So I see a lot about language, a lot about scripts, a lot about what language does in communities and organizations. Yeah, it's a lot of interest.
Yeah, because I think that also would be something that, let's see if it comes out from the symposium, that in various
Yeah.
parts of the world, how things are they different, how people look at it.
Well, I think one of the most deep things, maybe to say philosophically, is that language is not just giving labels to facts or objects, but that it's creating reality. That language itself has a creative power and is making things. It's not just description. It's also giving reality to things.
Her name is Mandi, but she puts her name as the Zoom link because I think she wants to be known as the Zoom link. Mandi, why do you put your name as a Zoom link? We have to understand that part in terms of language. Why is she putting that?
Hello, good morning in Holland, at least.
Good morning. Good morning. It's so nice to wake up with this beautiful, beautiful stories I made about the stories you were talking about. It was something between dream and reality.
Oh.
Yeah, it was so nice. So nice. This approach, this narrative mediation I haven't heard about was so nice.
But Mandi, you have put a question in the chat on YouTube. You want to elaborate on it? Herman wants to know, what were you wanting to ask?
I was wondering, all this with stories issue. I mean, everybody has a story for himself, a story for the story he has to live, a story in mind, who is trying to make true or is afraid not to make true. What is going on with all these stories? And if we add one more story, it's serial story, serial stories. It's for Netflix.
That's right. I think in a way, we are just a stage of a lot of stories all the time. Yeah. And I think it's an illusion to pick one of the stories and say, well, that's me. I think we are all. And not only personal, but also in the dog is very funny.
Yeah. Which one is it, Tigri or is it Russell? Who's that?
Russell.
Russell, okay. Russell is a story, and Mandi and Russell are a story by itself.
Story. We see a story now. Yeah, but I think it's very important that we are aware of all the lines of stories, all the plots and the scripts that are just going through us, and that we are part of, and that we can choose and pick the ones that are at the moment the most useful or the most hopeful or whatever. We can use the freedom to be in a story we want to be. That's, I think, a very important one. And what you said in the beginning, this kind of in between dream and reality, I think that's exactly the point of stories, that it makes dreams reality.
Thing with Mandi is, now Mandi, her question is by itself always a story, and her session is in the evening, the next session in the evening. I'm just wondering if 1 hour is going to be enough for her, because her questions are half an hour long.
I was wondering why you put 1 hour. I say, that's why he put another after me. That's a limit in my story. Boundaries. It's mediators with boundaries.
Yeah.
What do I do? Her session otherwise would, I don't know, go on with her stories. Yes, but Mandi, yeah.
Great for me. It was a wonderful opportunity for me to talk to you about this wonderful subject. So
do you want
I'm
to?
a happy man.
Yeah, but Herman, you want to kind of, Mandi, if there's no other question for him, Herman would maybe just kind of conclude his session if you want. Well, Herman, you can go on. I have no problem. There's no session after yours. But I don't know about I don't know about your time. Mandi and Russell have enough time. I know they can take more time, but it's all about you, Herman.
Yeah. Well, I concluded already. I think before. I think. Talking about language is talking about hope. Language itself is for me a very hopeful thing. There is so much freedom in it. You can there is no limit to the words and the connections you can make and the dreams you can make through with that. And I see it every moment in mediations, and not only in mediations, of course. It's a much broader thing in whole society. When we talk different, when we say other words, when we give the world other views of the things that are happening, it creates the reality in a different way. And I think that's a very hopeful thing. And that makes me a very optimistic person, I think.
Oh, yeah, that's wonderful. I think wonderful. So basically, of course, thank you, Herman. Like I said, always a pleasure.
I have one question, one more question.
Sorry. So the session is concluded now. Sorry, your questions cannot be taken up anymore. Okay, Mandi, please. Okay,
I will write you, Herman.
No, Herman. We have to. It all depends on Herman. Once the
it's
conclude,
all right.
He's okay. He has time. You can ask your question. Yeah, please, sir.
Dear Herman, you know what I was wondering? Every therapist says, get out of the stories and get the expectations we have. And the therapists try to take people out of stories and out of mind. And expectations also come together with stories. That's true, which brings disappointments if you make a story for your life and all this to live now and to, how do you combine this with this narrative mediation?
Yeah, I think if I understand you well, the purpose of a therapist that is saying that sort of things is making persons free of bad expectations that are just binding them and giving them less space of being the person they want to be. And I would say make a different story then, because also that is a story, of course. And what makes a story such a good thing to have is, I think, that it's making your dreams concrete, that it has color, that it has sound, that you can smell it, that you make a real life fantasy that you can live. Because a story must not be a fairy tale. It must not be a kind of aerial thing that is just somewhere there. And it is because it's not a reality, it's giving you not the opportunity to make it concrete. But I think a good story is an earthly story, is a story that just makes you earthing, makes you on the foundation of your own feet in the world.
But I think, Herman, to bring out that story, I think that part of it, the mediator's role in that, and the mediator bringing their authentic self. But these are words which have come up earlier, and we've kind of discussed it. I think there needs more discussion as to bring that story out is also important, and how you do that, and what you bring in also. I think it's an important part.
Yeah, yeah, it's seducing people, maybe sometimes by your own example, if it's difficult for them to tell, to feel safe enough to do it, or even to have connection with it, him or herself, by telling your own story in a way that is helping them to connect with themselves.
Yeah.
That's also in the engagement part of narrative mediation, is a very important thing. Yeah.
That's why it all comes down back to, of course, that heart, soul, spirituality part, that connection that you make to be able to bring that part of people out there. I think that's the important part. And of course, Mandi definitely has more questions for sure, but it totally depends on you, Herman.
No, it's good for now. Thank you very much.
So
yeah, the day is beginning here also, so we are.
How's the weather? But tell me, how is it cold?
Well, this day will be a very beautiful spring day almost. It's winter here already still, but spring is willing to come, so she's very welcome.
Okay, so good times are coming. So
sure.
Yeah, so if Mandi just wants to say a quick bye. Mandi, you want to just say a quick bye? No questions, nothing. You want to say a quick bye? Yeah.
Bye.
Bye. Yeah.
Yes. Bye. Thank you very much for now.
All right. Thank you, Herman. And the last day on the 21st, the last session at 10 o'clock India time. Please drop in, and we have, of course, after that we have Ken's session. So 10 o'clock is just we have half an hour to just talk about what you took back from the symposium, and then after that we'll just have Ken's session, and after that also we can continue our conversation. So thank you very much, Herman.
Thank you very much. It was an honor. Bye, Mandi.